The Democratic field for president is growing. Julian Castro is the latest candidate to officially declare a 2020 run. The former Obama cabinet member and San Antonio mayor officially threw his hat into the ring on Saturday. His first trip as a candidate was to Puerto Rico this morning to visit with people struggling after Hurricane Maria. Hawaii Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard also announced Friday she will be running for president. She is an Iraq War veteran and currently serves on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. In the coming weeks, many more hopefuls are expected to announce their plans to take on President Trump in what is shaping up to be a crowded Democratic field in 2020. CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins me now from Washington. And here with me on set is Democratic strategist Antwan Seawright. He's the founder and CEO of Blueprint Strategy, LLC. Welcome to both of you. Thanks so much for being with us. Ed, I'm going to start with you. As we mentioned, Julian Castro spoke in Puerto Rico earlier. What kind of a campaign does he intend to run?
It's one, Tanya, that I think is going to focus especially on trying to win over sort of the diaspora, if you will, that had supported Barack Obama's election and re-election. He's going to make a real appeal for minority voters, younger voters, and people disaffected by the tone and tenor of what goes on in Washington. That seems to be pretty clear. He's also, if you at least read his announcement speech, unapologetically liberal. He's going to try to tout the universal kindergarten program that he established in San Antonio and try to take it national. Talked a lot in his announcement speech about the need to sort of examine how police deal with communities across the country, touted Black Lives Matter, said that's important to him. Also said that while there are issues along the border, that it's got to be handled differently than the president is handling it right now. So someone who's clearly after liberal voters, but also those that are black and brown and younger. And they increasingly, of course, make up a big segment of the Democratic Party. So,
Ed, I want to ask you about another unapologetically liberal Texan, Beto O'Rourke. Does that put any pressure on him to make a decision?
No, and O'Rourke appears to be working on his own timetable. But we got to remember, we can't paint these two guys into the same corner because they are different in so many different ways. They share a state, but remember, they share a state that's massive. O'Rourke is in a different time zone out in El Paso from San Antonio. O'Rourke was a member of Congress and a city councilman before that, but otherwise they may espouse similar political beliefs, but they are quite different. And I think this whole, there's women, there's governors, there's mayors, there's black and brown people, there's young people, there's old people. It's kind of a silly casting maneuver that Democrats like to use. I think we just got to see who exactly gets out there. But privately, you talk to other campaigns, people who work for other potential candidates, and they say, really, the two people they're keeping an eye on right now are Joe Biden and Beto O'Rourke. Biden because he can raise big money from traditional party donors very quickly, and O'Rourke because he can raise big money very quickly in smaller amounts. And the question will be whether his ability to raise $38 million in a race against Ted Cruz transcends itself into an ability to raise tens of millions of dollars when it's unclear who his Democratic opponents are ahead of a race potentially with President Trump.
There are some Democrats I've even heard float the Biden-Beto ticket, so that's
totally
something that could happen. All right, Antwan, I want to talk to you about the fact that this field is potentially so crowded with dozens of Democrats potentially going to throw their hat into the ring here. Does that automatically benefit those who have a higher profile already? I mean, Tulsi Gabbard, for instance, is not necessarily a national name recognition candidate.
Absolutely not. If you remember, maybe 2006, 2007, no one knew who Barack Hussein Obama was.
Good point.
And no one could ever, I'm not even sure people could even put the thought process in their mind that he was going to seek the office of the presidency or run for the Democratic nomination. So I think that argument is put to bed. I think this is good for our party. I think it's good for the Democratic franchise. Look, the more the merrier. Competition drives the marketplace. And this will put to bed these questions and these thoughts out there that the Democratic Party does not have a bench. We have a very diverse bench. We are the big tent party, and I think you will see the uniqueness and the diversity of our party in this 2020 cycle.
So you see this as a strength? You see this huge crowded field as a strength?
Yeah, absolutely. It gives the voters a chance to really see who the Democratic Party is and what we're about. And not only will we see the who, we will see the what, because they all are going to have to talk about issues. They're going to have to go to South Carolina, where I believe the road to heaven and the White House runs through. They're going to have to go to places like Georgia. They're going to have to campaign in Texas. They're going to have to campaign in California. And they're going to have to raise money. So we're going to see a very robust primary, and I think it's good. We saw what that did for the Republican Party, and I think it's going to do the same, if not more, for us.
You're right. We're going to see a lot of who and a lot of what
That's right.
through this process. So, Ed, I want to ask you, Politico is reporting that Bernie Sanders is adding staff for 2020. What advantages does he have after becoming a household name in 2016? You know, a lot of Democratic strategists say, you know, he did a lot for the party, but maybe that ship may have sailed. I know, Antwan, you want to comment on that in a minute, but I'm just going to have Ed comment on it first.
I think you made it clear there what his biggest advantage is. He's a household name. A lot of these other folks are not. So he's a known entity, whether that's good or bad. And it means that, you know, in this early polling, which is about as useful as a napkin as an umbrella in a rainstorm, you know,
like
he polls well early on. But the moment that the actual competition he faces in a primary emerges, and the numbers are going to change. Not only the polling numbers, but potentially the fundraising numbers. Remember that a lot of his appeal was not only that he was this independent Democrat, self-described socialist, but also because he was taking on Hillary Clinton, and there was a segment of the party that didn't like her. With her removed from the scene, the dynamics going into 2020 are going to be far different, which is why a lot of people think he may run again if he wants to, but he won't necessarily enjoy the early lead and the attention and the following that he had last time.
So, Antwan, what's your take on Sanders?
So a couple of things. One, the DNC ruled that you must be a Democrat to seek a party's nomination. That's number one. And number two, this will be a totally different primary than we saw in 2016. There will be at least 2 African-American candidates in the race and 1 brown candidate with Mr. Castro, who we talked about earlier. And so,
not to mention lots of women.
There will be lots of women. And not only that, you will have similar candidates to the Bernie Sanders message. They will be singing from the same hymn notes that he sung from in the 2016 election, which you have to line that up. Is his message going to be accepted more than Elizabeth Warren, who will have a very similar message, or Gillibrand, or any other person, or even a Joe Biden, the middle-class messenger in chief himself? You have to understand how does that line up and how does that impact. And plus, I think Bernie Sanders has the same problem he had in 2016, his disconnect with the African-American community. I don't see anything changing from that. If you knew what happened in South Carolina in 2016, you would know exactly what I mean. Hillary Clinton ran the day in South Carolina where 60% of the people who cast their vote were African American, and went into states after South Carolina. It was pretty telling.
Why do you think he has such a weakness when it comes to the African American vote?
Well, he represents Vermont.
Aren't a lot of African Americans there, let's face it.
He represents Vermont, but most people do not equate Senator Sanders as someone who's really talked about and advocate for the issues that most African Americans think about. Now, whether he has or has not, the record will speak for itself on that. But when you think about people who have and you compare them to him, it's night and day.
But economically, he hasn't addressed those issues?
I think he may have addressed them, but addressing them and how you articulate those issues to the voters are 2 different things, and I think he's had problems doing that.
Right. All right. Philly columnist Will Bunch writes, the senator clearly has a lot more to give his country, but as the spiritual and intellectual leader of the movement that he's built over half-century, not as an Oval Office hopeful. So it's a little bit more what we were talking about earlier, that a lot of Democrats credit him with moving the party a little bit more to the left, but that maybe the baton has been passed on at this point.
Yeah, I think he may have missed his time after 2016. And look, why I commend him for everything he did, because I believe he made Hillary Clinton a better general election candidate, even though she did not win. He pushed the party. He brought in new fold and new faces to the party. He has a massive base and fundraising list.
And hey, now we talk about socialism like it's, you know, everyone's talking about it. And you can't even imagine that, you know, before.
No one imagined being able to do that before 2016. So
absolutely.
We'll see.
All right. So we did hear Castro slam President Trump by name in his speech, Ed, even saying he represents the antidote to President Trump. Warren, in her Iowa visit, was not quite as direct. So will proving oneself as the antidote to President Trump become the ultimate litmus test for Democrats in 2020? Or do you think the road to success is ideas and not beating Trump?
I think that's really one of the existential questions for Democrats going into 2020, Tanya, is it about beating Trump and finding some way to do it with the right person? Or is it also, or separate from that, about what it means to be a Democrat? And I think you can have that fight at the same time. We've seen Republicans do it to some extent back in 2016 when the argument for them is what does it mean to be a Republican and who can beat Hillary Clinton. They had that debate pretty successfully, and ultimately they won. So we'll see if what it ultimately is for Democrats. But I think if you were to lay the policy proposals or the general beliefs of most of the folks who are going to run and are running up against each other, you're going to find pretty similar beliefs on a lot of different issues, whether it's health care. They're going to argue about how to do it and who gets it and how to pay for it. But when it comes to issues of foreign policy and other domestic policy, generally they're in agreement, and there are some significant differences on the details. But, you know, so it'll be curious to see whether they decide to pick apart those sort of specific issues or focus more on how do you address the president. And it's telling that in some cases we've seen some of these Democrats talk about him a lot. I think in the case of Castro, he's talked about him more, and far less from others like Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris, who I think at this point are still trying perhaps to define themselves a little bit and explain to Democrats and the broader country who exactly they are.
Interesting strategy. What do you think is the winning strategy?
And I'm sure you know the song, "It Takes Two to Make the Thing Go Right." And so I believe that we're going to have to not only be the antidote to Trump, but we're going to have to talk about what we're for. And Democrats will fail if we talk about just being anti-Trump instead of putting forth a policy agenda or a policy prescription that will heal what I think the brokenness of America. And I think we've done that well in the midterms, but I think we have to continue to run the plays we drew up in the midterms that got us across the finish line.
And do you agree with Ed just said that you think there'll be more similarities than differences?
Absolutely, because at the end of the day, nobody wins when the family feuds, as Jay-Z often tells us in his music. And so I think we have more in common than we do differently. I think everyone wants to get to the mall, making the mall a bed of America, but I think some people have different routes they want to take to get there, and that's okay. I think that's good for this thing called the American experiment.
Antwan Seawright, thank you so much. Ed O'Keefe, thanks to you. Thanks to both of you gentlemen for being with us.
Take care, Tanya.